Om Tavakatamritam Tapta Jivanam Kaviviriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadatam Bhuvivananti Bhuridajanaha. Your words are like nectar, bringing life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We are on chapter 7. This is the Master and Vijay Goswami, and we're on page 174. This chapter covers several different days, I think 3 different visits. The first 2 we see Sri Ramakrishna and Rakal and Vijay Krishna Goswami, and for some reason this third entry, this is Monday, January 1st, 1883, we don't find Vijay Krishna Goswami here. So somehow, I don't know if he's there and he simply doesn't say anything, or if this was just added, it wasn't long enough for its own separate chapter. But in any event, this is the first entry that we have in the year of 1883, January 1st. So it starts out, at 8 o'clock in the morning, Sri Ramakrishna was seated on a mat spread on the floor of his room at Dakshineshwar. Since it was a cold day, he had wrapped his body in his moleskin shawl. Pran Krishna and M were seated in front of him. Rakal too was in the room. Pran Krishna was a high government official and lived in Calcutta. Since he had no offspring by his first wife, with her permission he had married a second time. By the second wife he had a son. Because he was rather stout, the master addressed him now and then as the fat Brahmin. He had great respect for Sri Ramakrishna. Though a householder, Pran Krishna studied the Vedanta and had been heard to say, Brahman alone is real and the world illusory. I am he. The master used to say to him, in the Kali Yuga, the life of a man depends on food. The path of devotion prescribed by Narada is best for this age. We had a long discussion about this earlier, because this was also the question that Vijay Krishna Goswami was asking Sri Ramakrishna, which is better, the path of devotion or the path of knowledge? So this is advice that Thakur would give specifically to certain people and just in general. In general, he would also say that the path of devotion is better. There's a Sanskrit verse that attributes a different type of worship and spiritual attitude according to the different yugas. So this Annagata Pran is what is described in the Kali Yuga. That means that we have a materialistic attitude. It's not simply depending on food, but this annamaya kosha, everything exterior, external. The mind is outgoing, that we have our attachments. This is the main reason why the path of knowledge is more difficult. A devotee had brought a basket of jalebi for the master. This was his favorite sweet. And there's a very famous sweetmeat jalebi shop in Kamarpukur. I think the same one is still there from Thakur's time. And he used to love these jalebis. They're very nice. They look like pretzels. Huh? They fry them in oil, then soak them up in syrup, and they're very crispy and very nice. Eating a bit of the sweets, he said to Pran Krishna, a devotee had brought a basket of jalebi for the master, which the latter kept by his side. Eating a bit of the sweets, he said to Pran Krishna with a smile, you see, I chant the name of the Divine Mother, so I get all these good things to eat. Laughter. But she doesn't give such fruits as gourd or pumpkin. She bestows the fruit of amrita, immortality. That is knowledge, love, discrimination, renunciation, and so forth. A boy, 6 or 7 years old, entered the room. The master himself became like a child. He covered the contents of the basket with the palm of his hand, as a child does to conceal sweets from another child, lest the latter should snatch them. Then he put the basket aside. This was something that they saw very often with Thakur, that when children would come, he would become just like them. And he used to say that the Paramahamsa is like a 5-year-old boy, and he likes to keep children around because their mind is on the same wavelength in certain areas. Rakal, Swami Brahmananda, who was the spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna and was supposed to have been the one who resembled him most in his spiritual attitude and his visions and everything, even they say in his appearance a little bit, also was like that. As soon as little children would come, he would play games with them and become just like one of them. So he's playing with this little boy, and then all of a sudden the master went into samadhi and sat thus a long time. His body was transfixed, his eyes wide open and unwinking, his breathing hardly perceptible. The eyes are wide open. That means that everything is visible, that whatever image is there that can come and impress itself on the eye and can go to through the organ to the brain and to the mind and everything, but he won't see anything because the mind isn't attached. So it makes no difference whether the eyes are open or the eyes are closed, and the mind is not attached to the senses at that time, so he won't experience anything. His eyes wide open and unwinking, his breathing hardly perceptible. After a long time, he drew a deep breath, indicating his return to the world of senses. Master to Pran Krishna: my divine mother is not only formless, she has forms as well. Now, he is not saying she has form as well, she has forms. Now, sometimes he may say that she is with form and without form. Here he's using the plural. She has forms as well. One can see her forms. Now, this was Thakur's way of explaining how God can reveal himself or herself to different devotees in different ways. And he gave so many different illustrations. When the water freezes into blocks of ice, those blocks can take any form, and it's still water. And it's still, water is always formless. Even when it's in a block of ice, it doesn't lose its formless nature. It's temporarily taking a particular form, and Thakur says it takes the form according to the him shakti, the power of cooling power of the devotee. That means that the devotee wants to see God in a certain form, and God can appear in that form. Now, we have two ways of understanding this: the subjective model and the objective model. Subjective model would be really the devotee model, that God is thinking, oh, my child wants to see me in this form, I'll appear in this form. The other is, that's objective. The other subjective, that is, it's strictly my desire to see God in a certain form, which is responsible for seeing God in that form. Or it can be a combination. It can be just be the very nature, whatever color I want the cloth dyed in the vat, it'll come out that color. Is it the power of the dye or the desire of the liquid in the vat that it comes out blue or red or green, or is it my desire that it comes out blue, red or green, or the person who owns that vat of liquid? Hard to say. So this is all the ways this play between objective and subjective. If we say, oh, these visions are just subjective, does it mean they're not real? No, of course they're real. They're real. But the particular form, whether it's objective or subjective, it's not real in the same way that the water is real, because it's temporary, it's not permanent, and it could be otherwise. There's nothing absolute about it. And this is a very good thing, because then we can accept the truth of different types of realizations. Someone realizes God in one form and says, no, this is the form of God. Another person says, no, this is the form of God. Third person says, God can reveal himself or herself in any form. whatever form you want to see, and then we can accept everything. So he's talking now the different forms. This means that for the mystic will have different visions, and these visions will be 100% real, but they'll be very particular. Now we know that one of the features of the divine absolute reality will be its universality. So this is again that play between the universal and the particular, that the universal will, if the universal appears to us, it has to be in a particular form. But that doesn't mean that that's the form that belongs to it, that that's the only form. So he's talking about all the different forms. That means all the different ways that he's experienced God and realized God. One can see her forms, one can behold her incomparable beauty through feeling and love. The mother reveals herself to her devotees in different forms. This is the objective way of looking at it. That is the mother who's doing it. We read about the story that when Hanuman went to see Sri Krishna in Dwaraka, and Rukmini was there, and he said to her, "Oh, let me go and change into my Rama form, because that's the form that Hanuman wants to see me in. He won't be pleased if he sees me in my Krishna form." So this is that putting everything on the side of God, that revealing himself or manifesting himself in a particular way for the sake of the devotee. I saw her yesterday. She was clad in a seamless ochre-colored garment, and she talked to me. Now, if we question these things, that this is just a vision, we have to remember Narendra questioned him even more. And he used to say that it's a hallucination. Moner Bhul, he used to say about all of his visions and things, till he started having them, and he was still a teenager when he first came. But if we think we understand this, then we're also fooling ourselves. How can we possibly understand what it means to see God in all these different forms? When Thakur says, yes, Mother will come, she'll talk to us. How do we know, if it ever happens, how do we distinguish that from the madman who hears voices? There'll be tests, of course, the genuine nature of it and the purity of heart and all of that. But for us, we just have to accept the fact that there are experiences that certain mystics and saints have that we don't have or won't have, and it's not necessary to have. Thakur was a mystic. There can be many fully God-realized souls, perfected souls, that don't have all of these visions and things. There's a question of temperament a little bit. We know the story of Baburam Maharaj Swami Premananda, how he came to Thakur one day and said, everyone is having visions, I'm not having any visions. So Thakur said, okay, let me talk to the Divine Mother. And Mother said, oh, he'll have knowledge, he won't have visions. And he was a perfect soul, he was an Ishvara Koti. So it's not that everyone will have these types of visions, but this shows that we can't put any limit to God. Iti korajaina. Iti, we can't put into quote, God is this and nothing else. Thakur used to like that expression. She came to me another day as a Muslim girl, 6 or 7 years old. She had a tilak on her forehead and was naked. She walked with me, joking and frisking like a child. We may think, what is this naked business? In India in those days, even today in some places, little kids don't start wearing clothes till they're older. I thought it was very cute. You see all these little kids running naked, only with a little thread around their waist, or a little bead on it or something like that. It's a hot country and nobody cared about these things. At Hriday's house, I had a vision of Gauranga, so Divine Mother can appear in a male form. The Gauranga, because when Thakur talks about Mother revealing herself, he's talking about this infinite absolute reality. He's not talking about Mother Kali or Durga in any specific way, that she's the one with 4 arms or 6 arms or 10 arms. That's all a manifestation of Mother appearing in different ways. At Hriday's house, I had a vision of Gauranga. That means Chaitanya Deva. He wore a black bordered cloth. Haladhari used to say that God is beyond both being and non-being. Sadasada kila bheda titam ekaswarupam. We chant this in the mornings. It's part of the hymn to Sri Ramakrishna. God is beyond both being and non-being as the Nirguna Brahman. But Thakur's point is that Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman belong to the one and the same reality. They're not two separate things. If we say God is only this Nirguna Brahman, then we're limiting it. We're not getting the full scope of the infinite power. And then we have to say that this whole universe is something different from God. If we say God is beyond being and non-being, that means that God is something separate from this universe. So it's really, from that point of view, not a non-dualistic statement. It's telling us about the perfectly transcendent nature of consciousness, but it doesn't account for this visible universe. So Thakur would say, yes, the Nirguna Brahman is absolutely true what you say, but the same Brahman has this power, this Shakti, to project this universe and to uphold this universe, to pervade this universe. That's also an essential feature of Brahman, but not an absolute feature, because it's not always active, that power. So essential, but not always active. So this is why the Nirguna Brahman is always there. That the Brahman, even when this Brahman is manifesting as the universe, it remains beyond and behind as pure consciousness. That part never changes. But sometimes it will, just as we have the example of the woman and the mother, that the woman aspect is always there. When the child is there, she's a mother in addition to being a woman. The woman part is always there. That's the essential unlimited, the aspect that can't be eliminated. But the motherhood depends upon the child, upon this visible universe, the Ishwar aspect or the Sagun aspect. So Haladhari, see, Thakur had Haladhari and Hazara and others, they thought they were great Gyanis. And they would talk like that, and they would criticize Thakur sometimes, and they would tell these young boys that you should be doing spiritual practices, you shouldn't be just frisking about and enjoying yourself with Thakur and laughing at his jokes and everything. And what is this, going to the temple and making offerings? Don't you know you're offering to yourself alone because you yourself are God? And Thakur would say, yes, this is a very high ideal, but don't spoil things. These are young boys. Of course, he knew that these young boys were far advanced to them. So Thakur, that was one of the Leela aspects of his life, that he was surrounded by these people. Half of them were his relatives also, or from his village or nearby villages, that were all there to serve him or to be priests in the temples, that couldn't fully appreciate the breadth of Thakur's vision and experiences. So Haladhari used to say that God is beyond both being and non-being. I told the mother about it and asked her, then is the divine form an illusion? This is what Thakur did. Whenever he got confused about something, he would go to the Divine Mother. The Divine Mother appeared to me in the form of Rati's mother and said, do thou remain in Bhava. Ratir Ma, Rati's mother, she was a devotee, a Vaishnava devotee, who used to come sometimes, probably belonged to this Karta Bhaja sect, but was a very staunch Vaishnava. Thakur says one day she saw him taking the prasad from the Kali temple and stopped coming again. But he mentions her a few different times, and there were 3 times in his life when he heard this command of the Divine Mother, remain in Bhava Mukha, and once was with this vision. When he heard this Rati's mother, we don't know her other name, this was generally how they referred to people in those days, Ratirma. He heard it from her lips. He had a vision of her for some reason. So we have to say that there was something special about her, whatever else there was about her. Do thou remain in Bhava. Now, Bhava here we have to understand as Bhava Mukha, because that's how he explains it in other places, and it makes more sense. We'll understand Bhava Mukha. See, there's a footnote, and the footnote doesn't explain Bhava, it explains Bhava Mukha. So even the editor and translator is taking it that way. A rare state of divine exaltation when the devotee, after realizing the absolute, remains in the borderland between the absolute and the relative. Sometimes Thakur says between the fifth and sixth states. From the sixth state he can look up and see that roof, the Nirvikalpa Samadhi state, and from the other he can see everything as a manifestation of the divine. In this state he sees that both the absolute and the relative are the two aspects, as the two aspects of the Godhead are real. So Lila and Nitya, that they're both real. And also in that state he is able to keep the mind from getting merged in the absolute Brahman. So when he heard the command, the most important time was the third time after his Nirvikalpa Samadhi. This allowed him to live in the world. Otherwise the mind kept going up. So the Divine Mother appeared to me in the form of Varati's mother and said, "Do thou remain in Bhava." I repeated this to Haladhari. Now and then I forget her command and suffer. Once I broke my teeth because I didn't remain in Bhava. Now it sounds very odd. He actually broke his teeth because he was in Bhava. That means he was in some ecstatic state, but it means he wasn't controlling his mind to keep it from going up too high. So this means he's entered into the Bhava Samadhi state. Now Bhava has so many different meanings. It can just mean ecstasy in general. We see Bhavastha, that will say Thakur was in an ecstatic mood and talking to everyone. So being in Bhava has a big range. The lower range, it simply means one is filled with divine bliss and feeling that joy of the divine presence, but can sing and dance and enjoy the company of others. Other type of bhava will be mind disappears from this world and goes to some divine realm and has different experiences and visions. That will be this time. Thakur had at least there are two instances of injuries that he had. One was this: he fell down, we see a little chip in his tooth. That he was in this state of ecstasy. When he's in that state, he can't see anything. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't really have control over his body. He can easily fall. So he fell and chipped his tooth. The other time was when he broke his arm. And that caused a big change in his mind. We'll get to it a little bit, but that's when he said, I should start seeing God with eyes open, dwelling within all beings. Well, I'll get to that in a little bit. So once I broke my teeth because I didn't remain in Bhava. So I shall remain in Bhava. That means this Bhava Mukha state, trying to keep the mind from going into that Nirvikalpa Samadhi state, unless I receive a revelation from heaven or have a direct experience to the contrary. I shall follow the path of love. What do you say? Now he's asking Pran Krishna, just like a child would ask, why should he care about Pran Krishna's opinion of him? And yet Thakur, he anytime somebody had a certain opinion, he would take it a little bit seriously, like a child. And he would say, a child has so much guilelessness that if somebody comes and somebody says, oh, this is your elder brother, the mother will say, you can call him Dada, he's your elder brother. He'll accept it 100%. He won't even ask, this person comes from a different village, belongs to a different caste, or it won't even occur to him. So Thakur was like that. He was very guileless and childlike sometimes. So he would ask the opinion of others. And if they said something funny, he would disturb his mind a little. And he would go to the Divine Mother, and she would assure him, no, what you say is right. Master, but why should I ask you about it? There is someone within me who does all these things through me. Now, this is both philosophically true and metaphysically true, but also Thakur's experience and his spiritual attitude. It's a question of spiritual attitude. The jnani who realizes the infinite absolute Brahman won't necessarily talk like that. Their sense of identification will be with the Brahman itself, but they won't say that there's someone inside me. They may say that this body is simply acting due to past karma, that I'm not doing anything. They may have different ways of explaining it. The same phenomenon, different explanation. So there is someone, and in English they write someone with a capital S, meaning some divine presence, divine mother is the way Thakur understood it. There is someone within me who does all these things through me. At times I used to remain in a mood of godhood and would enjoy no peace of mind unless I were being worshipped. So this means that he felt a sense of identification. I am he. I am one with his infinite absolute reality. Now, when he said, I enjoyed no peace of mind unless I were being worshipped, it's not this ego I. We may say, oh, how egotistical. He wants to be worshipped. He didn't find that small I at that time. He found that I identified with the Supreme. He said at one time, that wasn't a mood that lasted very long. I am the machine and God is the operator. I act as he makes me act. I speak as he makes me speak. This is a famous Ram Prasad song, but there are also Kamalakanta. There are other songs that give us the same idea. This was a very common mood with these Shakta saints, those who realized God as the Divine Mother. This was an attitude, spiritual attitude and a spiritual mood and a spiritual realization where they felt that Mother within was guiding them. So there are two ways that it would happen. Sometimes Thakur would feel that Mother was guiding him and Mother was providing words for him to say. Other times the Mother herself was doing everything. He used to say, sometimes I look within, I see that the Mother is there and child is there, both are there. Other times I see Mother alone is there. So at that time, then either he has no awareness of himself at all, or if he feels himself, the body and mind and everything, this is just an instrument in the hands of the Divine Mother. Just the chariot and the horse and the reins and the coach master, but the Divine Mother is inside directing everything. Keep your raft, says Ram Prasad, afloat on the sea of life, drifting up with the flood tide, drifting down with the ebb. It is like the cast-off leaf before a gale. Sometimes it is blown to a good place and sometimes into the gutter, according to the direction of the wind. Now, this is an idea that we find from the Advaita Vedantic point of view also, that one of the verses from this Ashtavakra Samhita, which many of us have read together, a highly Advaitic text, that it says that one should live in the world like a dried leaf, Shushka Parnavat. Cheshtate Shushka Parnavat, that after God realization, that what type of effort does one put forth? The same type of effort that a dry leaf puts forth. That means no effort. Doesn't do anything. So what determines where a dry leaf will go? Just wherever the wind takes it. And they take that in these Advaitic texts as past karma. Wherever the past karma leads the body to move or act or do anything, that's what it will do. There's no individual left with any desire to do anything. So this illustration works in both ways. Thakur, he gives a very nice example when they have these outdoor feasts with everything is served on a leaf. And the leaf, the dal and rice and everything are there, and it gets all soaked and wet and it sticks to the ground. And in those days, everybody left everything there because later the cows would come and eat everything. You didn't have to clean up afterwards. But gradually, the sun would come out and everything would dry up, and then it would curl up a little bit. And if the wind came, it would pick it up and it would fly all over the place. Now, the leaf itself has no willpower and no interest to decide where it will go. It goes wherever the wind blows. So this is supposed to be the description of the God-realized soul, that they don't make any effort to do anything. If something presents itself to them, they'll do it. Otherwise, there's nothing they have to do. As Sri Krishna says, in the three worlds, there's nothing that I have to do. There's nothing I gain by doing anything, nothing that I lose by not doing anything. He said, still I remain active. That was because he was an avatar. But the point is here that Thakur himself felt that way. He didn't make decisions. You know, that the incident when Hridoy worshipped the granddaughter of Mathur Babu. Trailokinath's daughter, and when the father found out, he was furious. It was supposed to be highly inauspicious for a Brahmin to worship a non-Brahmin little girl, and he was furious and he kicked out Hridoy, and they went to tell him, and some reason, either with miscommunication or he was also angry at Thakur, for some reason Thakur was told to leave. So what did he do? He didn't affect him in the slightest. He said, "Oh, I have to leave," and he took his gamcha, threw it over his shoulder, and started walking out. Because everything for him was the will of the Divine Mother. He didn't make any decisions, anything like that. Then they found out that Thakur was leaving. They said, "Oh no, it wasn't him. We want Hridoy to leave." They ran after him and begged him, "Please come back and stay." And he said, "Okay." Didn't mean anything to him. He didn't know where he was going, where he would stay, what he would do. It wasn't in his mindset to even worry about that. So he was living in the world like a cast-off leaf before a gale. As the weaver said in the story, the robbery was committed by the will of Rama. I was arrested by the will of Rama, arrested by the police by the will of Rama, and again, by the will of Rama, I was set free. All of these things are both a spiritual attitude and means that we adopt at the time of spiritual practice and the result of God realization. We find that over and over again. The end result and the means have to be in sync with each other. So we can practice this even if we still have some sense of I. Something happens and we say, "No, I don't like that. I want to change that." We just tell ourselves or remind ourselves or try to feel, "No, it's the will of God." Then we can accept it that way. So it's a spiritual practice, or spiritual attitude that we adopt, that we assume. Thakur will talk about this a lot, that we have to sometimes use our imagination. We read about this and say, "Okay, let me imagine what it's like to be that weaver. Let me imagine what it's like to feel that whatever happens is the will of Rama." And then we find that this is a spiritual practice. This is what Girish had to do when he was practicing this, giving the power of attorney to Sri Ramakrishna. That it wasn't natural for him. He felt that I really decide what I want to do and what I don't want to do. So each time he had to think, "No, let me think how one would act if one really felt that I don't do anything. I have no right to do anything. Everything is, I should act as I'm directed to act by a higher power." Hanuman once said to Rama, "O Rama, I have taken refuge in thee. Bless me that I may have pure devotion to thy lotus feet, and that I may not be caught in the spell of thy world-bewitching Maya." Once a dying bullfrog said to Rama, "O Rama, when caught by a snake, I cry for your protection, but now I am about to die, struck by your arrow. Hence I am silent." I used to see God directly with these very eyes, now, just as I see you. Now, divine visions in trance. Okay, now, we had a slight reference to this earlier, about how he saw God with, at the time, in the state of Bhava and everything. Now, there's a third one here. So, Thakur is talking about earlier. He would have visions where he actually saw God along with everything else. Now, when he says, "I used to see directly with these eyes," that doesn't mean that all of his visions were like that. That his first vision of the Divine Mother was not looking at her or anything. His mind was gone. That was in a state of Bhava. But there were other times, and he says that the first time he had a vision like this was a vision of Sita. That he said, I was, and it didn't just happen on its own. This was after he was practicing this Dasya Bhava, feeling himself to be Hanuman, feeling himself, adopting that mood, that attitude. He himself did that. That's why he could tell us. And he said, I saw everything. I saw the Panchavati, I saw the walking path, I saw the trees, the leaves, everything. and I see this majestic, calm, beautiful, peaceful-looking woman walk towards me, and I didn't know where she came from, who she was, or anything like that. And then I saw one of the Hanumans. Hanuman is a monkey. One of the monkeys dropped down from the tree and went in front of her and rolled on the ground. This is a sign of great devotion, to roll on there. Gorda Gordi, he rolled on the ground. And then he said, then I understood this was Sita. Sita with that smile of hers, and she gifted that smile to him. So he used to say this was the first vision that I had, with eyes open, seeing everything else. So he had that, and then the last time when he fell and broke his arm, that was the time when he felt the Divine Mother was telling him that don't see God only with eyes closed, within this state of bhava, see God dwelling in all beings. So this is not a lila. And he used to give credit to Vaishnav Charan. He used to say, Vaishnav Charan used to tell me that the highest vision of God is God dwelling within all human beings. Not a Narayana. Narayana will be the transcendent aspect, Nara will be this human aspect. And he said, now I know that it was true, what Vaishnav Charan said. So these are two things. There's a third one. I used to see God directly with these very eyes, just as I see you. Now I see divine visions in trance. Then the third stage will be back again. And we see this especially in Kashipur, with eyes open. He would see, when he looked at physical objects, he would see everything as Chinmaya. Everything is as if composed of consciousness. And when he saw individual beings, he saw them as the embodiment of the divine. He saw Rama in all men, and Sita in all women, or the divine in all. So really, he had the vision of God, whether his eyes were open or closed, both different ways. Whether in Bhava, not that he stopped having ecstatic visions and everything, he did. But the emphasis was more on seeing God dwelling within all living beings. After realizing God, a man becomes like a child. One acquires the nature of the object one meditates upon. Okay, now we ask ourselves, what are the fruits of meditation? What do we gain by meditating? And generally we think we're trying to increase our concentration, we're trying to increase our devotion, we're trying to have some type of higher realization, become one-pointed, to stop the vrittis of the mind. These are all true, but meditation on God with form and with the personality is supposed to allow some transference to take place. If we meditate on Holy Mother, some sweetness would come into our personality, some forbearance. We meditate on Sri Ramakrishna, some ecstatic love of God. These are transferable. This is how do we get these things? Deeply meditating, we take on the qualities of the object of meditation. So we find that spiritual life, from one point of view, is all about transformation. That we're trying to change our present understanding, our present worldview, our present sense of identification, and rearrange everything, restructure everything. We have the vision or the illustration sometimes of people who have some gold jewelry. Say the wife has some bangles she's had for years and years and other things. She's a little tired of them. So what does she do? She goes to the goldsmith and gives him all of this gold jewelry and says, melt it all down and make some other things for me. So they take the form, they get rid of that, they melt it, it becomes molten gold, they'll pour it in a different type of mold, it'll come out differently, but it's the same gold. The same gold. They won't be trading it in for new jewelry, they'll use the same gold. So the same individual stuff that we have, or the personality that we have, we're going to try to melt it down and recreate it, and we pour it into the mold. What is this mold? Thakur used to say, I am that mold. I have created the mold, now you pour yourself into that and come out transformed. So one way we transform ourselves is through meditating on God with personality and with characteristics and qualities. One acquires the nature of the object one meditates upon. The nature of God is like that of a child. As a child builds up his toy house and then breaks it down, so God acts while creating, preserving, and destroying the universe. Further, as the child is not under the control of any guna, so God is beyond the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. That is why Paramahamsas keep 5 or 10 children with them, that they may assume their nature. Now, Thakur gives this exact same illustration when he describes the nature of the Paramahamsa. So, this is what he's saying. The qualities of the God-realized soul and the qualities of God are the same because they're being transferred. If God is perfect and we become perfect, then we also, if God is same-sided, we become same-sided. If God is one, we feel that oneness. So we take on these qualities. There's one verse from Gita that I like very much. It says that they have conquered this world, who are established in sameness. Now why? Because Brahman is the same. Brahman is the same to everything, no distinction in everything, and we can fix our minds in this oneness and sameness, then there's no distinction, then we are Brahman. So the characteristics of the God-realized soul and the characteristics that we attribute to God, God will be beyond everything, but they'll be one and the same. So exactly what he's saying, the nature of God is like that of a child, building up his toy house and then breaking it down, he'll say about the Paramahamsa, the God-realized soul. Sitting on the floor in the room was a young man from Agurpara, about 22 years old. Whenever he came to the temple garden, he would take the master aside by a sign and whisper his thoughts to him. He was a newcomer. That day he was sitting on the floor near the master. Master to the young man. And man can change his nature by imitating another's character. This is what I was saying earlier. Imitate, I don't know if this is the best translation or not. This is imitating it doesn't give the feeling of sincerity behind it. What this really means is that if we see a quality in someone that we respect, and we think is a very nice thing, we wish we could have that, then we ourselves try to adopt that. You know, there's a very famous book called The Imitation of Christ. And when Swamiji was wandering, during his wandering days, I don't know always, but for at least sometime, he said he carried only 2 books with him. One was the Gita, and the other was The Imitation of Christ. He liked it very much, and he even wrote a Bengali introduction to it. And anyhow, the whole idea of that is that we imitate Christ if we want to get the benefit through worshiping someone and not trying to take on their qualities won't accomplish that much. If we respect somebody, and why do we respect them? We respect their truthfulness. So we have to imitate that. That means that we try to adopt that in our own lives. Imitation is the highest form of flattery. This is an English expression. Imitation. So it won't do any good to go and say, "Oh, I admire your truthfulness so much," and then we go and tell lies. If we really admire it, we'll try to do it ourselves. That'll be the highest type of flattery, the highest type of appreciation for someone. So this is how we change our nature, by imitating. Thakur usually uses this term asroy kora, that we take refuge in this, we take shelter in this, we adopt it. This idea of adhyasa, we superimpose this on ourselves. That it may not be natural to us in the beginning, but we're superimposing something which is really part of our real nature, which we've forgotten. This is the key. If we're superimposing something which doesn't really belong to us, it won't work. But this is covering everything with God. This is the Isha Upanishad teaching. We cover everything with God because everything is God. So if it's just some false imagination, it won't mean anything. But this is what we're imagining is something we'll find out is true. Today's imagination is tomorrow's realization. This was a saying that Swami Atmajnanananda liked. Today's imagination and tomorrow's realization. So why am I saying imagination? Because I don't really realize the truth of it at this point. God alone is real. I can say that, and yet I'm superimposing that idea on my mind, which doesn't really know what it means at this point. Type of affirmation, but by doing that, one day I'll realize the truth. Oh, it really was true from the very beginning. So the very important teaching when he says, a man can change his nature by imitating another's character. He can get rid of a passion like lust by assuming the feminine mood. Now, Thakur did this, and he used to say that one of the reasons why a man will feel lustful towards a woman, or vice versa, is identification with the body and identification with whatever our gender is. So because I identify not just with my body, but with a male body, then I'll see a female as an object of enjoyment. If I can identify myself with a female body, then I may see a female as, oh, just my sister. Huh? I'll get rid of this attitude. Of course, this is something that won't work for everybody, but he's giving the idea here. But he said, this is what he did in his case. I think it was a full year, where he lived and dressed like a woman in Mathur Babu's house and worshipped the Divine Mother as a woman, and felt really like he was a companion of the women, and they felt it also. They considered him, they weren't shy in front of him, they considered him one of their own, they would laugh and joke with him and feel perfectly free with him. This actually remained throughout his life. Whenever he was with women, and when the men weren't there, when the women were around and the men were there, then he was a little cautious because he knew that they couldn't do what he could do. But when he was with them, they all felt so free with him. In front of any other man, they would have kept veiled and would have been shy. In front of him, they were perfectly free and could laugh and joke. They felt that he was one of them. Even when he was a child, he was like that. Some of his best friends were the daughters of the Laha family, and he would go and spend lots of time with them. Should I tell the story? What was his name? Dharmadas Laha. He's the father of the daughters. He was very proud that no man had ever come into the inner apartments where the women stayed, and that he kept their virtue, like they're very proud of that. And Thakur was a boy at this time, but he wanted to challenge him somehow, so he dressed himself up as a girl. And he went, and they didn't recognize him, and they invited him in. This strange girl has come and everything, and he went into the inner apartments. It showed them who he was, and they were all laughing and joking and everything. And then he walked out, and they saw that it was Godai, it was Sri Ramakrishna, and that curbed the pride of Mr. Laha a little bit. So he had that because he had no identification with the body. He could easily identify as male or female or even as a monkey. He perfectly identified with Hanuman during that Dasya Bhava sadhana. So a man can change his nature by imitating another's character. He can get rid of a passion like lust by assuming the feminine mood. He gradually comes to act exactly like a woman. I've noticed that men who take female parts in the theater speak like women or brush their teeth like women while bathing. Do they brush their teeth differently? There's something called dhang. Dhang is a way that people do different things. Thakur had a very keen eye. He would notice all of these things. Sometimes he would imitate the way different people do things, and the way these women, singers who do kirtan and everything, the way that he said that they'll push back and just show off their bangles and things like that, and the devotees would be roaring with laughter. So he noticed all of these little things. Come again on a Tuesday or Saturday. These are 2 days that are especially auspicious for worshippers of the Divine Mother. Thakur very often would ask devotees to come, and he would give some special advice. And Tuesday was a weekday, so there would be fewer people there also. To Pran Krishna. Brahman and Shakti are inseparable. Now, half the time we'll see are identical. Huh? The word is abheda. It's I like inseparable better. Now, when they say Brahman and Shakti are identical, they're not talking about Shakti as the power that belongs to Brahman. They're talking about Brahman together with its power. So it's true, Brahman and Shakti are identical if we understand that the woman and the mother are identical. They're the same person. Or that Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman are identical. If we think of Shakti as power, then they're not identical, they're inseparable. That we can't have the power that doesn't, we can't have an attribute that doesn't belong to a particular substance. We can't have a color that doesn't belong to a fabric or any quality that we think of it has to inhere in some type of material thing. So Brahman and Shakti are inseparable. Unless you accept Shakti, you will find the whole universe. I, you, house, buildings, and family. Let me read this again. Unless you accept Shakti, you will find the whole universe unreal. Sorry. I, you, house, buildings, and family. Yeah, because if we start out with the Brahman as pure, infinite, absolute consciousness and inactive niriha, that can't do anything, it's just consciousness itself, then what is the possibility of this universe? And if this universe does exist, then what is the substance of this universe? One of the descriptions of Brahman is that this Saguna Brahman, is that Brahman is the instrumental cause and the material cause of the universe. Instrumental and material cause of the universe. So it's not like a carpenter and wood. The carpenter will, the wood and the carpenter will be two separate things. And the carpenter will cut the wood and saw it and glue it together and build something out of it. But the substance of itself is also Brahman. So it's the material cause also. So without that idea, we can't explain this universe. Unless we want to be complete dualists. Unless we want to say, well, Prakriti is something separate. It can exist whether anything else is there or not. There's a materialistic view. But then it's hard to explain how consciousness and this material universe, where's the meeting point for them? Where's the meeting point? The sun can reflect in the water because there's some point of contact. Where's the point of contact? So the Advaitins will say, no, there has to be ultimately oneness. The world stands solid because the primordial energy stands behind it. So this is this idea of ground. The difficulty with the mechanical view of the universe, even the quantum mechanics. Suppose we can get everything down to matter and energy. Where do they come from? What sustains them? What holds them? What is their source? There has to be something unchanging behind that which is changing. So even then, there'll have to be something underneath, upholding them. This is the ground theory. It's very important in philosophical discussions that there has to be a sufficient ground to explain the existence of something. If we see, I'm now looking at the carpet on the floor. If somebody says there's only carpet there, I'll say, what's holding it up? There has to be something that's holding it up, otherwise it'll fall down. There has to be a ground to it. So we pull it up and we say, there's a concrete slab. But we can keep going further. What's holding up the concrete slab? We have to ultimately get to something. Otherwise it's an infinite regress. We can't keep saying, no, it's the egg and it's the chicken and the egg and the chicken. There has to be something absolute and unchanging. That'll be Brahman. However we understand it, it a little bit defies logic. But there's no other way to otherwise we're living in a universe that's 100% relative. We have to accept this fact that I can only explain the chicken by the egg and I can only explain the egg by the chicken. It's not very satisfying. Of course, no theory of creation is fully satisfying. They all have their flaws. The world stands solid because the primordial energy, Adi Shakti, stands behind it. If there is no supporting pole, no framework can be made, and without the framework there can be no beautiful image of Durga. You see these artisans Just you'll see them by the roadside sometimes, a few weeks before Durga Puja or any big puja. They'll make these beautiful images of Mother Durga. You won't know what they're made of. There's no way to see anything inside, but they have to start out with the framework. They'll take some bamboo and they'll tie it together, then they'll add some straw. Gradually they'll keep building things up, and then they'll put the final finish, and then they'll paint it and put ornaments and everything. But they can't do anything without the foundation being there. There's nothing to build upon. So if there's no supporting pole, no framework can be made, and without the framework there can be no beautiful image of Durga. Without giving up worldliness, a man cannot awaken his spiritual consciousness, nor can he realize God. Now we're going to get the same thing again. A little later, Thakur is going to say that one cannot get beyond worldliness unless one realizes God. So we can't realize, so we'll say, oh, well, we're stuck. Unless we're free from worldliness, we can't realize God. And we can't get rid of worldliness unless we realize God. What do? Our hands are tied. Huh? This is when we adopt that attitude. We say, okay, let me imagine that I'm free from worldliness. Let me try. So this is a spiritual practice. Without giving up worldliness, that means that to the extent that we can. We try not to run after worldly objects. We try to practice truthfulness. We try to practice spiritual austerities, whatever it is that is part of our spiritual life. He cannot but be a hypocrite as long as he has even a trace of worldly desire. Now, we all have traces. We have more than traces of worldly desire. But we won't be hypocrites. We'll say, no, we know this, and we're doing our best to realize God. We're not going to make claims that I am He, when I know that I have all these desires. God cannot be realized without guilelessness. This was one of the great prerequisites that Thakur had. When he says that if we practice truthfulness, that we can realize God. This truthfulness and guilelessness are very similar. Why do we tell lies? Because we're not guileless. If we're very simple people, we won't try to impress anybody. We won't care what they think about us. So the guilelessness and truthfulness are very closely aligned. We'll stop here, but I want to tell one story. Let me just finish this. Okay, I can stop here. Okay. That I heard from Swami Atmajnanananda ji. It's a very nice story. I've told it before, but everything I say I've told before. He was working in a tribal area one time, and he decided one day to teach the kids to not tell lies. Now, these tribal boys were very, very simple, 100% guileless. And first thing they said, what is a lie? And he said, well, suppose you do something and you say that you didn't do it. And they said, if we did it, why will we say that we didn't do it? And he went on, and then he realized that these boys didn't know what it was to tell a lie. They were so simple and so guileless. So we see that these go together. They're not two separate teachings. That we analyze why we say things that aren't 100% true because we want people to have a certain impression of us or for our gain or something like that. So, okay, so we'll stop here. It's a little bit in a funny place. But anyway, it goes on to a song. This is the bottom of page 176. Okay, and let me close with our chant. Om Niranjanam Nityamanandarupam Bhaktanukham Bhatthadavikraham Ishavataram Bharamishamidyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namamaha. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.